So on my About section on my channel, there is a link to my blog. The blog I've renamed, kind of rebranded to Unexpected Games. I mainly do quarterly posts. This is just my way of having some sort of outlet for my thoughts and impressions on the games that I play and finish. It's not super consistent. I'm definitely not timely when I post things, but that's part of the channel at this point. So, again, in beginning of December, I did my first quarterly writing kind of stream where I read through and shared my thoughts on the games I played during the first quarter of the year. So again, that was January through March. So now we're up to April. So my goal is to kind of lead into my game of the year discussion, my top 10 games of the year, and kind of do a year in review for gaming in 2021, which I'm also currently kind of drafting at the moment. That's going to have like more, like not honorable mentions, but nods and kind of shout outs and other thoughts on gaming in general last year. Basically, I like to think of it as a place for things that have no home, I guess you could say. Just general writing and thoughts on certain games and things in games. So I'll probably do that after my Game of the Year post, but so the goal is to stream and talk through Q2, Q3, Q4, and then my Game of the Year countdown post, which will hopefully be before Monday, January 17th. So I'm going to try to hold myself to that, and we'll see what happens. So let's go and talk through the games that I've been playing during Q2 of 2021. You can kind of tell what game probably stood out to me the most. And will this be on my top 10? I don't know. So I always start with kind of a intro kind of paragraph of sorts. So the header was what a difference a year makes. So remember, this was kind of put yourself back early 2021. The first 3 months were a little rocky, very uncertain feeling still. I was at the end of the first quarter, so at the end of March, I had an idea of when I could maybe get my first vaccine shot, but I was still mostly isolating, coming off 2020, still working from home. So it was a little, the first quarter was a little weird feeling and definitely rough. And now that we're in the first quarter of 2022, it doesn't feel too different, to be honest, with everything else that's going on. But, so at the time of writing this, this would have been, I don't remember when I posted this. Does this say when I posted my Q2? I think it does if I back out of it. But so I start with, if you're not familiar with my writing, for the past few years, I've been attempting to complete or roll the credits on 52 games during the year. The goal with these blog posts is to write a paragraph or two for each game I've beaten. There's both an online forum community. So if you do, if you want to follow this post or read this post, there's actually a link here, and a Discord comprised of like-minded individuals who enjoy sharing their progress and impressions on the games they've completed throughout the year. During the second quarter of the year, or second quarter of 2021, however, I became fully vaccinated. So that would have been March, April, May. I think by May 1st, had my 2 shots. Although variants are on the rise, it's funny I say that then. So this would have been, I didn't post this I probably posted this sometime in June. I've been dipping my toes back into society over these past few months and reconnecting with friends I haven't seen since before the pandemic. Because of this, I haven't completed as many games as I have in previous years, especially when compared against 2020, which is perfectly fine. But that said, here are the games I did manage to beat during the months of April through June. If you'd like to see what I've completed during the first quarter of the year, you can read about that here. There's a link there. And there's also on my channel, I think it's still there. It hasn't, enough time hasn't passed. The read through of my first quarter games is still on my channel, and I'm attempting to save them and archive them and throw them on a YouTube channel that's like slightly edited, which I haven't gotten too far with. So game 15 of 2021 was Ballen Wonderworld. And it isn't great by any stretch of the imagination, but I sort of love it. Growing up, like many kids born in the late 80s, early 90s, it was almost impossible to not have played Sonic the Hedgehog for the Sega Genesis. There's home videos of me sitting on the carpet, glued to the TV at my aunt's and uncle's house, playing the original Sonic as a child during the holidays. Years later, my parents were cool and fortunate enough to gift my siblings and I a Sega Saturn for Christmas with a handful of games, including Nights into Dreams. I love the game so much for all of its weirdness and eccentricities that I found myself recording the game's music from our old TV's terrible speakers with a blank tape and a boombox. Years later, I would graduate to Sonic Adventure and the rest of Sonic Team's releases long after Dreamcast's short lifespan, including Billy Hatcher and the Giant Egg for the GameCube. Needless to say, I approached the game with a degree of bias, so I knew I was going to enjoy Ballen Wonderworld to an extent, but what about everyone else? So I was really looking forward to Ballen Wonderworld. It's probably one of the most poorly received critically, commercially games of 2021. It had a lot of pedigree. I'll read a little bit further. I love 3D platformers. I grew up with Sonic, so I kind of had an idea that I was going to kind of begrudgingly like it, no matter how bad it was probably going to be prior, leading up to the release. The trailers didn't really, I don't remember, like the footage of the game made it look better than what it ultimately ended up being, but that's a lot of games. To no one's surprise, Ballen Wonderworld released to little fanfare and an almost universally heated reception. At its core, Ballen Wonderworld is a 3D platformer with a heavy emphasis on collecting things. The gimmick, you have one button that does nearly everything in the game, including your jump, which has become one of the many focal points for the discourse surrounding its release. In each of the game's numerous levels, you also collect costumes, which transform you into various characters. Each of these costumes typically grant you a new ability, power, which lets you traverse the stage in unique ways or solve simple platforming puzzles or sequences. One costume might allow you to float short distances, while another may grant you the ability to destroy specific blocks. The problem, however, is that some of these costumes don't allow you to jump by default. Furthermore, you can only carry 3 costumes at any given time, and once you get hit, you'll lose that costume until you recollect it. The stages are mostly designed around a level's costumes, but a lot of the time you'll reach a platform or two that can't be reached without something that allows you to perform the most simplest of actions. It's certainly frustrating and a strange design decision no matter how you slice it, despite the levels mostly being designed around this philosophy. So that was a lot. There was a lot going on there. I get very mechanics heavy when I write. I get a little too in the weeds, I think, for a general kind of consumption, but no one really reads, I don't know who actually reads reviews anymore. People watch Twitch or YouTube videos or YouTube reviews or, look at Metacritic or whatever. So the kind of writing that I'm doing is they're sort of review-ish without the score. So I don't really know how beneficial this is to anyone, but I like doing it. Similar to Nights, the game has no dialogue and the cutscenes environment tell the little story that's actually present. The game, once again, is about exploring the subconscious or dreams of individuals who have experienced some sort of life hardship. There's a dolphin trainer, for example, who had a bad experience while performing underwater, so their level is water-themed, including the boss, which is a nightmarish amalgamation of a dolphin. Amalgamation. I think that's how you say it. There's even a professional chess player who just happens to get defeated by someone younger than them. And this is pretty harsh what I wrote. Perhaps some would say is a metaphor for the game's creator, Yuji Naka. So if you don't know who Yuji Naka is, he's one of the original co-creators or creators of Sonic the Hedgehog. And he spearheaded, or was at least one of the key kind of individuals behind this project. And after the game flopped, it sold poorly, was received poorly. He kind of disappeared, didn't have much to say. I don't think there's been a post-mortem on this game yet, which I'm really curious about. I don't think any of the developers came out and said like what went wrong with this game, and he's since left Square Enix to form his own studio, or he released a mobile game recently apparently. I don't remember the name of it, but it's a very simplistic like arcadey mobile game because he wanted to go back to his roots and kind of relearn what it is to make a game. So again, I'll just reread that. There's even a professional chess player who just happens to get defeated by someone younger than them, perhaps some would say is a metaphor for the game's creator, Yuji Naka. And the entire stage is a warped chessboard of sorts. You get the idea. It's kind of weirdly worded on my part. The game also has beautifully rendered CGI from Square Enix's Image Studio division, formerly Visual Works, which are quite well done. I really enjoyed the game's minimalist approach, although it does leave many questions as to what you're doing half the time for the people that you're saving. There's also a novel called, I can't believe there's a book, called Ballen, Wonderworld, Maestro of Mystery, Theater of Wonders, which apparently goes in more in depth with the game's story and characters. Some may appreciate this multimedia approach, but I'm personally not a fan of sharing your game's vision through multiple forms of media. And I write cough. Final Fantasy 15. So I'll just keep reading. Can I zoom in? Or is it all? It's not gonna work. If there's one area where I believe Ballen Wonderworld does excel in is that the stages do not overstay their welcome. It's something I feel very strongly about when it comes to 2D, 3D platformers. Give me short and sweet levels with some cool ideas, interesting mechanics, great music, and I'm usually all in. Unfortunately, Ballen Wonderworld shows its cards very early on, for better or worse. Each themed world contains 2 traditional platforming levels and a boss encounter. I'd like to think you're in and out before any of the costume stage mechanics become too frustrating, but your mileage may vary depending on your level of patience, which I apparently have a lot of. Or I have a lot of, apparently, was what I wrote. The bosses are the highlight of the game, and they almost feel Mario-esque in design, with their bouncy animations, unique mechanics, and the fact that they take 3 hits to defeat, the rule of 3, which I think is really important. Ballen Wonderworld ultimately feels like a lost Dreamcast era 3D platformer that fits right in home with the 6th generation of consoles, which is certainly not for everyone in 2021, and perhaps not the greatest selling point for a full-price game, which at the time of writing this, the game can be purchased with a fairly hefty discount. Oh, I wrote a lot. So there's one element of the game that's fairly inexcusable, however. There are bonus rounds, mini-games where you control Ballen in QuickTime events, QTEs, and while they're mostly optional, they are truly miserable. That's kind of a weird sentence, especially if you're going for 100%, which I did not. Perhaps due to budgetary reasons, I have no idea why the player couldn't control this character and fly around the environments during these segments, as that would have been the perfect tribute to Knights, the game that inspired Ballen Wonderworld to begin with! Exclamation point. I completed the game with a decent amount of the collectibles earned, but there's quite a bit of content here and some post-game challenges if you like the game well enough. Ballen Wonderworld has problems, and it's a project that could have been so much more than what we ultimately received, but does it deserve all the negativity and social media dragging it's received from the gaming community at large? I don't think so, or not really. Perhaps we'll never know why the game released the way it did, which is why I kind of want like a post-mortem. I want someone to come out and say like what was the deal with this game, but there's a lot of heart and care on display here that's hard to dislike. Regardless of how you may feel about the game, we're likely never going to see, which is kind of, I was kind of wrong probably to say this because Ratchet Clank kind of came out, although it's a little different from this. We're likely never going to see a AAA style 3D platformer like this ever again due to its lackluster sales and poor reception. And it honestly breaks my heart. See you in my dreams, Ballen. That was my thoughts on Ballen Wonderworld. I got pretty into it. It was one of my most looked forward to games last year, and I don't hate it still. I kind of want to go back to it and work towards 100%ing and platinuming it. I'm not super motivated to at the moment. I don't know when I will be. But yeah, that game didn't get the treatment. It got a poor treatment online. I think people are way too harsh. A lot of it's justified. A lot of it I think is a little hyperbolic or I don't know. It's okay. Tory or Tory 3D by Siactro is the type of game you'd see someone speedrunning at 2:30 in the morning during AGDQ SGDQ. It's an extremely short 3D platformer from an indie studio that's previously known for MacBat 64, another 3D platformer that was specifically inspired by games like Banjo-Kazooie and Super Mario 64. Tory 3D is pretty bare bones, for better or worse. You simply start the game, select a character from 3 options, 2 of which are locked by default. Then you're given the option to tackle a handful of obstacle course-like stages in any order you'd like. Once you clear all of the levels, you'll gain access to the final boss stage. The controls are a little floaty, but tight enough where you'll find yourself cutting corners and mastering the stages if you decide to tackle the game's time trials. The levels themselves feel like obstacle courses that have been suspended in air with moving platforms, hazards, and the like. There's stars to collect in each level and A ranks to earn based on how quickly you can complete the stages, which, if collected or earned, will unlock both secret characters respectively. I believe I bought the game for $1 on the eShop. You could definitely do worse. I really like Tory 3D. I actually ended up playing Tory 2 this year as well, which I wrote about later on. Oh, that's all I had to say about it. That was Tory 3D. It was $1 when I bought it. I don't know how cheap it is now. You could definitely do worse. AGDQ, if you're not familiar, or SGDQ, Summer Games or Awesome Games Done Quick, actually starts this Sunday, so it'd be cool. I don't know if this game is on the schedule, but it's the kind of game you would see someone running. It's weird and obscure and kind of goofy, and if I was like a serious speedrunner, I might pick it as a game, just as like a funny short game to run through. You could finish it in a sitting, so not a whole lot to it. All right, Sackboy: A Big Adventure by Sumo Digital is one of the best cooperative experiences I've had all year. Next to It Takes Two, of course, which I talk about later. It's also the first time I felt good about controlling Sackboys. I've never enjoyed the floaty controls from the previous 2D games. With its transition to being a 3D platformer, however, the controls feel much more fluid and less floaty than Media Molecules Games, who were the original developers. I've also got a weakness for handcrafted arts and craft styled visuals, games like Kirby's Epic Yarn, Yoshi's Woolly or Crafted World, and Puppeteer, just to name a few. And one other game that will be on my top 10. Spoiler. There's a craftsmanship here that's hard to deny. Each level feels meticulously detailed with a lot of love and care. There's also great depth of field on display here, which is something I always appreciate if done well. Taking a note from Rayman Legends, there's also music levels, which are arguably the highlight of the game. Playing these rhythmic stages cooperatively with friends, trying to guess which song or artists were being remixed, brought about tons of smiles and laughter. The soundtrack as a whole perhaps stands out more than anything here, including the original compositions from a variety of composers like Lena Rain, for example, Chicory, Celeste composer, if you're not sure who that is. It's hard not to compare the game to Nintendo's Super Mario 3D World, which I wrote about last quarter. Sackboy is clearly designed around having 4 players traverse its many themed stages. Levels are laid out in such a way where paths will split into 2 segments and allow room for 2 players or more, so you're arguably not getting the full experience if you go at it alone. I played it, actually did play the whole thing with 2 friends, and then I did a lot of stuff solo as well. While the game can be played completely solo from start to finish, there's co-op only stages that must be completed if you're a completionist, however. While the platforming challenges themselves aren't anything you haven't seen before, stages still feel varied with unique power-ups and secrets to discover, and most importantly, they don't overstay their welcome, which if you haven't learned already, is a huge pet peeve of mine when it comes to 2D or 3D platformers. There's a lot of content here if you're the one who likes to complete games at 100%, such as myself, including time trials with leaderboards if you're looking to compete. And they've been adding, I say that they've even added time challenges with rewards now. I think they're still doing that as far as I know. All right. Sackboys definitely played best with others when the online servers cooperated, that is. Most sessions with my friends online were met with a lot of lag and connectivity issues. We could never determine if it was one of our connections or the server itself. Regardless, when the game worked, it was always a good time. However, since the game released during the pandemic and prior to the vaccination rollout, I would imagine it would have been more fun to experience the game locally with friends, siblings, or significant others. Sackboy also released during the transition launch of the new hardware, PS5 and Xbox Series XS respectively. So it feels like it got lost in all of the initial chaos. With that said, the PS5 version does utilize the DualSense controller to a degree, although it's not as impactful as, say, Astro's Playroom. But no game has made use of the controller quite as well as that game did. And that was both a pack-in and a launch title. Exclamation point. I completed the game with mostly everything collected, but I'm ways off from obtaining the Platinum Trophy, and there's a post-game world I've yet to tackle. I really liked Sackboy. Again, if you like Super Mario 3D World, and you have a PlayStation 4 or PS5, that's definitely one of the best 3D platformers that have come out since kind of the near launch or launch of the new hardware. So I would recommend it. I almost picked it as my late to the party, like my favorite game that didn't release in 2021 that I played in 2021, which is like a category for one of my other posts coming up. Stitchy in Tooky Trouble, developed by Polygoat, is a 2D platformer clearly that's inspired by the likes of Donkey Kong Country. They say imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, and that's honestly the best thing I can say about this game. Stitchy is perhaps the slowest moving character I've ever played in a 2D platformer. Unlike Donkey Kong and his gang, Stitchy has no forward momentum or roll, and outside of a double jump, it feels like you're dragging around a lifeless corpse at times. Not to disparage mobile games, but it feels like a game that was aggressively made for mobile devices. I believe the developer has a history on those platforms too. The level design is flat, uninspired, and rarely offers any sort of verticality. You can replace one stage for another, and outside of some visual differences in the background art, there's not a whole lot to write home about here. There are minecart levels and barrel blast focused stages, however, which add some much needed variety to the game, but it's nothing you haven't seen before. I actually 100%ed it, which is wild. I don't often like to dwell on negativity, and there's certainly a framework here that the developers could build from. The game could have been far more interesting if it perhaps leaned more into the fact that you're playing as a scarecrow. Not that scarecrows are super interesting, but hey, I'm not the designer here. The story setup is rather strange too. A bunch of tiki statues storm a cornfield and steal all of the stalks where Stitchy is guarding so that they can make popcorn at their factory to watch a movie. And the movie is the game, I think. It's really weird. Sure, why not? I completed the game at 100%, and while you could do far worse, there are much better 2D platformers and DKC likes out there, one of which I finished and wrote about below, which we'll get to. So the 19th game that I played through in 2021 was Returnal. Returnal is arguably Housemarque at their finest. Their signature arcade gameplay returns in one of their most ambitious games to date. Returnal takes the now popular roguelite genre of sorts and presents it in a true AAA production with cutting-edge visuals and sound design. In Returnal, you play the role of Celine, an astronaut who's crash-landed on an alien planet. The twist here is that upon her death, she repeats the same crash landing sequence over and over again in a Groundhog Day-style scenario. As she explores the alien landscapes, she finds herself experiencing flashbacks and visions from what appear to be from her past. Her past, present, and future. She also finds her body strewn about the environment from her previous attempts at survival on this hellish world. It's all rather dark and depressing. Returnal has had an interesting launch period, to say the least. Leading up to its release, this was Housemarque's re-entry into the traditional game release hemisphere, so to speak, after Matterfall in 2017, which I actually liked, even though it's somewhat divisive. A lot of Housemarque fans weren't super hot on Returnal, on Matterfall. Housemarque hit a bumpy road or two and claimed that they were done with their traditional arcade-inspired titles. They even wrote a letter to their fans, which you can read about here. I won't follow the link now, but It's kind of older at this point. A battle royale game was in development called Storm Divers, which is yet to release and may have already been canceled. I question that because I don't really know. Fast forward to 2021, and we now have their first AAA game that also happens to stay true to their arcade roots sensibilities. Stranger things have happened, but I'm glad this developer is back doing what they clearly know best. I wrote a decent amount. The rogue or roguelike subgenre has been around for ages, but it's become more popular, especially amongst the indie developer circuit. Games like Hades by Supergiant Games has propelled the subgenre into an entirely new stratosphere, for example. So it was only a matter of time before a larger AAA studio like Sony or Housemarque would make their attempt. With that said, the effort here doesn't feel forced or a response to the current trend. However, Returnal does have all of the usual roguelike trappings, run-based sessions, loss of power-ups or inventory upon death, shortcuts that make consecutive runs faster, and passive upgrades that carry between playthroughs to give you some sort of sense of progression. It's all here, but because of the presentation style and third-person perspective, it all feels fresh and new. Returnal is quite the experience, dashing around the environment, using the alt-fire adaptive triggers for each weapon, feeling the rain hit your controller with its haptic feedback, and watching the enemies explode into a dazzling array of particle effects never gets old. It's a mouthful. The sound design is impeccable as well. I played through the game mostly with the 3D audio from my headset, and as cliche as it sounds, the environment felt like they were alive. The environments felt like they were alive and breathing. The adrenaline rush you get when you dash into a room that locks down, it spawns waves of monsters, hearing their screams from every corner of the environment. There's nothing else quite like it. Returnal is arguably my favorite third-person shooter since Platinum Games' Vanquish, which is like a pretty high bar for me personally, which hasn't been personally dethroned in years. My three favorite third-person shooters from like previous generations, or I guess like the last generation, were, I always say this and it really hasn't changed. It's the original Gears of War, Vanquish, and Binary Domain. Those are my top three. Finally, now that I've had some time to reflect on the game, I'm finding myself comparing it to my time spent with another first-party PS5 title that has recently released, Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart. On the surface, they're both third-person shooters with dash mechanics and a fixation on devastatingly powerful guns. While RNC has always been known for its wacky arsenal of sorts, I found myself enjoying the gunplay here more than the game or franchise that's mostly been known for its third-person shooting. I completed the game with the initial ending, but there are still perks to unlock on weapons, artifacts to discover, and collectibles to earn in order to see the true ending, which I'll probably go back to soon, maybe. You can be sure that I'll be returning, see what I did there, to this game often until I secure the Platinum Trophy in the near future. So Returnal is very good. Two big hitters back to back. I think I finished these two kind of either on the same day or close to the same day. I think they were on the same day. I think I wrote a lot for this game too. Prior to the release of Resident Evil 7, the franchise was treading in some rough waters. RE6 and Operation Raccoon City, just to name a few, set the series off course for many fans, including myself. One could argue that the franchise was headed in the wrong direction since RE5, as it paled in comparison to RE4, despite being one of the best cooperative games for its time. Now we've arrived at Resident Evil Village, and although it's not as impactful or groundbreaking as RE7, due to its lack of PSVR support, it's still an incredible follow-up and a notable, if not relatively safe, entry in a long-running series that clearly has a lot more to say. RE7 felt like a reboot of sorts, with it being the first mainline RE title to go first person, if you don't count the Gun Survivor games. RE7's atmosphere is still unparalleled, and while Village doesn't quite capture the isolated, creepy atmosphere of the previous entry, it's not without its scares. Without spoiling anything, Village essentially pays tribute to the entire franchise. It's a roller coaster of sorts that takes the player on a wild ride through what feels like an assortment of amusement park attractions. It's got the action-packed encounters, variety, and superb pacing from RE4, the mansion-like design specifically in the starting castle area, which harkens back to the first game, and the weirdness you'd come to expect from some of the more esoteric entries like Code Veronica. The tall lady made quite the splash on social media, to the point where most people believed she was going to be the focal point of the game. Sure, the vampire-adjacent villains were mostly memorable and the performances were great, but there's so much more to Village than what we were led to believe, at least in terms of how the game was shown prior to release. Capcom unintentionally played us all, and I'm happy the rest of the game wasn't spoiled in pre-release footage or details. Village takes you to a ton of different locales and environments, with a central town that acts as a hub. That's repetitive. With the central town that acts as a hub town, which branches outwards, there's secrets, hidden areas, and other collectibles to find throughout the many areas you'll visit, but most importantly, it all somehow feels tightly woven together and relatively cohesive. The enemy variety and combative encounters are mostly good too. Monsters will duck and sway away from your shots, and I believe you can even duck to avoid grabs, which gives the player some decent movement options, considering it's a first-person shooter at its core. The guns mostly feel great to use as well, much like RE4 or 5 before. They can be upgraded with money, and you earn by selling treasures you collect along the way. Although there's nothing here that feels quite as satisfying as reloading the bolt action rifle from RE4. That was kind of a word salad there. I would rewrite that paragraph. I didn't really care for how that was written. But sometimes I write this stuff and I don't give it like a second look. I'll try to like edit or kind of, proof my work, make sure there's no major spelling or grammar issues, but I definitely, rereading some of this is a little suspect. One of my favorite moments playing Village, exploring the castle, managing my resources, getting stalked by the tall lady, and rushing into the safe room to restock my ammo and save my progress. This is what makes Resident Evil for me personally, and for that reason alone, I love the game. That's awkward. I think I rewrote that for one of my future posts. I'm not quite sure where the series is headed, but an RE9 is inevitable, and I'm hoping Capcom closes strong on this new trilogy of sorts. I completed Village on normal difficulty, but there's still a ton of unlockable goodies and harder difficulties to tackle, including recently announced story DLC, which at the time of writing this was like the middle of last year. They still haven't shown anything. If you're a longtime fan or a newcomer to the franchise, Village is one of the best games of the year, hands down. What's there to say about Super Mario Galaxy that hasn't already been said? A few months ago, I completed a replay of Super Mario Sunshine, which you can read about here. So again, the link's actually in my blog post if you care to check it out. From the Super Mario 3D All-Stars collection, so an SMG revisit was long overdue as well. I'm not quite sure if Galaxy, I'm just going to shorten it by saying Galaxy, is my favorite 3D Mario title, but certainly up there on my list. The level design is superb, the soundtrack is phenomenal, and it's simply a joy to play still. After all these years, the gravity-defying gameplay still somehow feels novel. If there's one super minor thing I don't like about the game, or rather something I would change, is the fact that it's missing, so I'm like a collectible, I love collectibles. The fact that it's missing the traditional 100 coin Power Star challenges for each world. And I don't mean the purple coin challenges you unlock over the course of the game. So I'm getting kind of like in the weeds here. I like collecting things in 3D platformers and finding the right Power Star objective in the previous two entries to net you that 100 coin Power Star secret. And each stage was something I always looked forward to completing. It's such a specific thing about 3D Mario games. I'm also really hoping Nintendo ultimately releases Galaxy 2 for Switch, as it remains to be a very strange omission from the collection, which is, enough people have talked about that. At the end of the day, I completed the game again with all 120 Power Stars and 9,999 star bits collected for that sweet, sweet watermelon unlock. So if you max out your star bits, I think some items, the melons, turn into watermelons, or like some kickable objects turn into watermelons. It's like an aesthetic secret change for maxing out which is essentially the currency in the game. Something I always do is I've been trying to post pictures. So all of these are uploaded from like their respective platforms. So they're like my own personal pictures. I usually just do the title screen and then like a completion picture to signify like, yes, I finished it. So sometimes it's like my file. So this was May 27th, 2021, when everything was said and done for my Galaxy revisit. The Pathless by Giant Squid is the follow-up to their last game, Abzu. It's a semi-open world adventure game that's clearly inspired by the likes of Shadow of the Colossus and The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. Similar to Abzu, there's little to no spoken dialogue, and instead the game opts for a more minimalist approach. While there's spirits and murals to read in order to gain a better understanding of the story. Most of the narrative is told through the environmental storytelling. One of the best things about the Pathless is the character movement or speed, however, dashing across lush, beautiful fields while shooting your arrows at charms, which give you a speed boost, felt far more satisfying than anything else the game had to offer. The game's rather non-linear too. You'll explore segments of an island, solving what can be best described as Breath of the Wild-like shrines, which give you collectibles that are required to access the boss of the area. This process repeats itself for the majority of the game, with each puzzle or area escalating in difficulty. The boss encounters, which are some of the more memorable moments in the game, mirror Shadow of the Colossus in a sense, although they're not exactly although you're not exactly scaling them. Each boss must be tackled on foot, first by shooting weak points on their bodies before entering a traditional boss-like arena where you'll fight them one-on-one. The actual boss fights themselves feel like something out of a Zelda game, however. There's also a lot of environmental secrets to discover, and a lot of them reminded me of the types of puzzles you'd find in The Witness, or even the Korok seeds from Breath of the Wild. As you collect and discover more of the game's secrets, you'll gain the ability to fly farther and jump higher. Should have been further, I think. Similar to the feathers you collected in another indie title, A Short Hike, which is also very good. Which gives you access to even more hidden areas and puzzles to solve. The Pathless was a slow burn at the start, but after a few sessions, the game finally clicked. It clearly wears its inspirations on its sleeves, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. I ended up completing the game at 100% with the Platinum Trophy earned, and I cannot wait to see what these developers do next. Yeah, the Pathless is a weird game for me, because like I started it and I wasn't really into it, and it has the makings of like everything that I like about games. I put it down for a few weeks, and then at some point I came back to it. I actually couldn't stop playing it. And this is one of my favorite shots. Like, so, I don't know why I didn't take a PSN screenshot. I just took a shot off my phone, which is weird. Yeah, the game's gorgeous. Kaze and the Wild Masks, developed by Pixel Hive, is the best DKC-like I've played in a minute. It's a 2D platformer through and through, but an exceptional one at that. It nearly captures what makes both the original DKC trilogy by Rare and Retro's more recent Donkey Kong affairs so good. Just like in DKC, there's Kaze letters to find, a la Kong from DKC, plus 100 gems to collect and bonus rooms to discover in each stage. Going for 100% is certainly challenging, but fair and rewarding. The art style and sprite work is great too. Kaze has a lot of personality, as she'll use her ears to grapple ropes or blow up her cheeks underwater to breathe. It's small details like this that aren't completely necessary, but go a long way in showing that the developers really cared about their game and its main character. The background art is also very detailed and colorful. There's even a good amount of parallax scrolling on display here, which is almost required in any modern 2D game. If you dig, oh, that was that was my writing for my screenshot. So I put like little comments, like old school review style, on my my post. The stage flow is superb, and you'll realize how great the level design is once you start attempting the game's time trials. Each stage also has unique platforming ideas, and they're hardly repeated. One stage may make use of ropes, while another will introduce bouncing jelly pads, which launch your character to greater heights. The levels are also short and sweet, highly replayable, and never overstay their welcome. Kaze and the Wild Masks checks almost every box for me personally when it comes to 2D platformers. More so than the original DKC trilogy, Kaze and the Wild Masks reminds me of the types of platformers we received in the early 90s. Games like Rayman, Klonoa, Door to Phantomile, which is one of my favorite games of all time. Some of the channel emotes that I have are all based on Klonoa and a stall. If you remember that one from the Sega Saturn. come to mind. If you had to play just one indie 2D platform this year, however, Kaze and the Wild Masks is my highest recommendation. Completed the game at 100%, and I can't recommend it enough if you're a fan of the genre. Yeah, don't sleep on Kaze. If you like 2D platformers at all, do not sleep on Kaze. It's a little like personality-less. I think most of the personalities in your main character. It's a little like, I don't want to say generic, but if you look at it in videos, it looks like a carbon copy of Donkey Kong Country, but it's really good. So don't let don't judge a book by its cover sort of deal. This might be my last game. Yeah. Okay, so we're at my last. So I didn't finish as many games in the second quarter of the year, surprisingly. Okay, this is a little divisive probably for people because I wasn't as hot on this as others were. Ratchet Clank Rift Apart, developed by Insomniac Games, is a phenomenal yet familiar showcase of what the PS5 can currently offer, both in terms of visuals and the power of the SSD. When the game flexes its dimension hopping capabilities, which essentially eliminates load times, as the player will be transported instantly to a new environment, it truly felt like the first authentic next generation experience. Unfortunately, outside of a few set pieces during the main campaign, the in-game pocket dimensions were essentially short challenge rooms with little visual flair, challenge, or creativity. The story plays with the idea that there are alternate versions of every character in the universe, and if you're a fan of the series, there are plenty of cameos and callbacks to previous titles, although spotting these references isn't necessary, as it's perfectly welcoming for newcomers as well. The series is also known for its wacky and outrageous arsenal of guns, and the weapons in Rift Apart, outside of a few, felt mostly tame in comparison to previous entries, or perhaps after so many games it's hard to feel surprised, which is how I felt, honestly. I don't want to come off sounding too negative, however, as there's a lot that I loved about the game. Rift Apart utilizes the adaptive triggers on the DualSense quite well, as each weapon has half and full trigger alternate fire depending on how much pressure you push down on the triggers. To put it simply, firing guns in an Ratchet & Clank game has never felt better. With that said, I do wish the enemy variety was better. That's redundant too. So you catch this kind of stuff when you read your writing. While they're designed with a consistent theme in mind, the robots or baddies you fight along the way don't really require you to make use of your weapon's capabilities. I was playing on the second to last difficulty, and I could essentially employ the same tactic during every combat encounter. Throw your turret-based weapons on the ground first, then unload the rest of your arsenal until you run out of ammo. Ratchet & Clank games aren't really known for their difficulty, but it would have been nice to see an enemy or two require more experimentation with your arsenal. Rift Apart is quite the looker, to say the least. The environments are colorful, densely packed, and meticulously detailed. One of my favorite things about RNC games is when you first arrive or land on a planet. As soon as your player jumps out of their ship, the camera is positioned further back to give the player a more scenic view of the environment. If you move either of the analog sticks, however, this is really nitty-gritty, in the weeds kind of stuff. The camera will snap back behind the player to its default position. While this isn't something exclusive to Ratchet & Clank games, Insomniac has been specifically employing this camera technique since the original release back on the PS2, and it's one of the smaller details that I've always appreciated about the games. At the end of the day, Rift Apart was an enjoyable yet familiar ride. Rivet and Kit, the new protagonists, and were in Rift Apart. I didn't need to write that again. We're both welcome additions to the cast too. I'd love to see them take the forefront moving forward, with Ratchet & Clank playing support roles, similar to how Peter Parker takes a backseat in Insomniac's Spider-Man Miles Morales. I completed the game with nearly everything done and collected, and I'll be revisiting the challenge mode in the near future to mop up the rest of the trophies. So I'm a huge Ratchet & Clank fan, but after the kind of honeymoon period dissipated for Rift Apart, where I'm just like, okay, it's impressive what it does technically with the load times and how you jump from kind of area to area pretty quickly. It's a PS2 game structurally. It's a PS2 game design wise, outside of the technical things they did with like the pocket dimension and the load times. Which isn't a bad thing, because PS2 era games are some of my favorite games still, but like once I realized what I was playing and the kind of the scope of the game, it felt, I kind of said at the time when I finished it felt more like a groundwork or framework for what the future of, like, you know, internally made PlayStation or Sony games will be. And it's specifically like what a Ratchet and Clank game might, like what it potentially could be at the end of the generation. Like if Insomniac, when you look at games at the beginning of a generation, especially from a specific developer, and then you look at what they release at the end of the generation, so think about like Uncharted to The Last of Us, it's a huge jump in like quality and kind of scope and structure even, or game design philosophies and all that jazz. So I'm more liked it as like it felt like a promise of what could be than like being like, fuck yeah, like this is like the best Ratchet game I ever played. And then I wrote a little thing at the end. I call it spillovers from the before times. So during the second quarter of 2021, I did manage to complete 2 other games. Ease 8 Lacrimosa of Dana, which I started in 2017. That's how long it took me. And Judgment, which I started in 2019. Currently, I'm not counting these 2 games towards my goal this year. I actually did not count them towards my goal, even though I did hit my 52, because I've been playing them on and off since their original release. I loved both Ease 8 and Judgment, which happened to make my 2019 Game of the Year list, even though I didn't roll the credits at the time. So I may share a few words on them towards the end of the year, which I actually did not say much more about them. But I just started playing Ease 9 this year, finally. I busted it out and cracked the seal a couple days ago, or I think it was on New Year's Day I started playing it. And I'm currently still playing Lost Judgment, so the same thing's happening again. I'm going to start these games. I started Lost Judgment last year, but it also came out towards the end of the year, so I didn't have a whole lot of time for it. But I'm going to keep playing them, and I love both those series to death, so. And that's at the end of my Q2 post. So you got Ripped Apart, Kaze, The Pathless, a replay of Super Mario Galaxy, because that was not my first time, Resident Evil Village, Returnal, Sticky and Tooky Trouble, which is probably the worst game I played during the second quarter. Sackboy, Tory 3D, and Ballen Wonderworld. Yes, Ballen Wonderworld was better than. The fuck was it? What was that game called? Tooky? Or Stitchy, right? Stitchy, Tooky, and Trouble. Stitchy in Tooky Trouble. Okay, so next up, I will be reading through my Q3 as I make my way towards my fourth quarter blog post, and then ultimately my game of the year. So again, I plan to stream and read through these before 2 Mondays from now. So not this coming Monday or this coming week, but the following week. My work's about to pick up and get pretty crazy, and the hour's going to get pretty wild. So my personal goal is to like commit to what I said I wanted to do on this channel, which was to stream and read through these blog posts that I wrote throughout last year. And I'm hoping it becomes like a normal thing I do going forward, but we'll see. So I will pick up with what I've been playing Q3 2021 next time, which may be this weekend, hopefully. I would like to knock these 2 out this weekend, but I'll see what happens. So yeah, those were the games I played from April through June of last year. Returnal or Resident Evil Village were probably my 2 favorites from there. And again, if you'd like to go back and see what I played during the first quarter of the year, you can kind of tell what my favorite games were, except for maybe this one, this third quarter. This picture's not indicative of like what my favorite game was, but I usually pick a picture for a game that I really liked from that quarter, and Little Nightmares 2 was really fucking good. But again, my link to my blog is on my main channel. The channel on Twitch is Unexpected Enemy. The blog or website is Unexpected Games, and the link is in the bio or about section. In the about section, technically. So, yeah, that is the, I'm going to close this stream out. It was going to be a short stream regardless. If you're watching this after the fact, I appreciate it. If you hopped in and just lurked for a minute, thanks again there as well. And I will see everyone next time.